The rain fell quietly over the city that evening, tracing delicate patterns against the towering glass windows of the mansion that stood like a monument to wealth and power on the hillside. Inside, the halls gleamed with polished marble and soft golden light, every corner meticulously arranged, every surface reflecting the careful precision of a life built on control and expectation. It was a place where silence carried weight, where even footsteps seemed conscious of their own sound, where the air itself held a certain formality that never quite allowed anyone to forget where they stood in the invisible hierarchy that governed everything within those walls. Kang Min-ho had inherited this world without asking for it. At 32, he had become the youngest CEO of Hanseong Industries, a conglomerate that his grandfather had built from nothing, and his father had expanded into an empire spanning electronics, real estate, and international trade. The weight of that legacy sat on his shoulders like an invisible crown, one that he wore with practiced composure in boardrooms and shareholder meetings, his expression always measured, his words carefully chosen, his presence commanding respect without demanding it. He had learned early that emotion was a luxury he could not afford, that vulnerability was a weakness others would exploit, that the only way to survive in his position was to maintain an impenetrable distance from everyone around him. But there were moments, quiet and fleeting, when that carefully constructed armor felt unbearably heavy. She arrived at the mansion on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, when the leaves were just beginning to turn and the air carried the first hints of winter's approach. Her name was Yoon Ji-woo, and she had been hired through the estate management company that handled all domestic staffing for the household. She was 26 years old, with kind eyes that reflected a certain gentle resilience, the kind that came from years of learning to find small joys in difficult circumstances. Her resume was modest: a high school education, a few years working at a small inn in the countryside, recommendations that spoke of her reliability and quiet diligence. She had come to Seoul out of necessity, not ambition, following the sudden illness of her younger brother, who needed treatment only available in the city hospitals. The salary offered for a position at the Kang estate was more than she had ever earned, enough to cover his medical bills and the tiny rented room they now shared in one of the city's less fortunate neighborhoods. On her first day, the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Park who had served the family for nearly 20 years, led her through the mansion's lower floors, explaining the routines and expectations with clipped efficiency. Ji-woo listened carefully, nodding at appropriate intervals, her hands clasped in front of her as she tried to memorize the countless rules that governed this unfamiliar world. She would be responsible for maintaining the third-floor guest wing, ensuring the rooms were pristine, the linens fresh, the furniture dusted, every detail perfect for the occasional visitors who stayed there. She would work 6 days a week, arriving before dawn and leaving only after the evening routines were complete. She would remain invisible to the family whenever possible, a shadow moving through the background of their lives, present but never noticed. It was a role she accepted without complaint, grateful simply to have the opportunity. Min-ho first saw her 3 weeks after she began working there, though she had no idea he had noticed her at all. He had returned to the mansion late one evening after a particularly exhausting day of negotiations, his mind still cycling through numbers and contingencies as he walked through the quiet halls toward his private study. He had paused near the grand staircase, loosening his tie with one hand while reviewing an email on his phone, when he heard the soft sound of humming drifting from somewhere above him. He looked up, curiosity briefly overriding his exhaustion, and saw her on the landing of the third floor, carefully polishing the brass railing with a cloth, her movements slow and methodical. She was humming something simple and familiar, a folk melody he vaguely remembered from childhood, something his grandmother used to sing. Her expression was peaceful, almost content, as if she had forgotten for a moment where she was and what she was doing, lost in some private thought that brought a faint smile to her lips. Something about that moment caught him off guard. The simplicity of it, the unguarded nature of her expression. In this house where everyone wore masks of professional courtesy or calculated deference, where every interaction felt like a transaction, there was something unexpectedly genuine about that brief glimpse of someone existing just for themselves, humming a song to pass the time while performing a thankless task in an empty hallway. He stood there longer than he intended, watching her work until she finished that section of railing and moved out of sight. Then he shook his head slightly as if waking from a momentary distraction, and continued to his study, pushing the image from his mind. But it returned to him the next day during a board meeting, and again the following evening when he passed through the hall and found himself unconsciously looking toward the third floor, wondering if he might catch another glimpse of her. He told himself it meant nothing, that he was simply tired, distracted by stress, his mind seeking any small reprieve from the constant pressure of his responsibilities. Everyone needed moments of mental escape, after all. It was nothing more than that. Weeks passed, and autumn deepened into something colder and more austere. Minho found himself increasingly aware of Jiwoo's presence in the house, though their paths rarely crossed directly. He learned her schedule through observation. She arrived each morning at 5:30, entering through the service entrance with the other staff, always carrying the same worn canvas bag over her shoulder. She worked with quiet efficiency, never lingering, never drawing attention to herself. During the brief moments when he saw her in passing, she would bow respectfully and step aside, her eyes lowered, maintaining the proper distance that her position required. He began to notice small things. The way she arranged flowers in the guest rooms, choosing combinations that felt natural and unpretentious rather than showy. The careful attention she gave to even the smallest details, ensuring that books on shelves were perfectly aligned, that curtains hung evenly, that everything reflected a certain understated harmony. He noticed that she often worked later than her scheduled hours without complaint, staying to help the kitchen staff when they were overwhelmed or assisting the elderly gardener with tasks that were becoming difficult for him to manage alone. Mrs. Park, when asked casually during a household review, spoke of Jiwoo with measured approval. "She's reliable," the head housekeeper said, her tone suggesting this was high praise indeed. "Never late, never idle. Some of the younger staff can be careless, but she takes pride in her work. She keeps to herself mostly. Polite girl, doesn't involve herself in gossip." Minho filed this information away without examining too closely why he had asked in the first place. It was during the first week of December, when early winter had settled over the city with its characteristic gray coldness, that something shifted in a way he could no longer ignore. The mansion was hosting a small dinner party for several international business partners, and the entire staff had been working for days to ensure everything was perfect. Minho had spent the afternoon in back-to-back meetings with his advisors, reviewing the strategic partnerships they hoped to secure through this evening's carefully orchestrated social gathering. He had retreated briefly to his private sitting room on the second floor to change into formal evening wear, seeking a few moments of solitude before descending into hours of diplomatic conversation. As he adjusted his cufflinks in front of the mirror, he heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he said, expecting his personal assistant. Instead, Jiwoo entered, carrying a tray with pressed shirts that had apparently been delivered to the wrong room. She froze when she saw him, her eyes widening slightly with obvious surprise and discomfort at finding him there. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said quickly, bowing deeply. "I was told to deliver these to the second-floor sitting room. I didn't realize you were here. I apologize for the intrusion." "It's fine," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. "You can leave them on the chair." She moved quickly to do so, her movements efficient, but betraying a slight nervousness. As she set the tray down, one of the shirts slipped from its wrapping and began to fall. She reached for it instinctively, catching it before it hit the floor, but in the process knocked over a small crystal vase that had been sitting on the edge of the side table. The sound of it shattering against the hardwood floor seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Jiwoo's face went pale, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the scattered pieces of crystal glittering in the lamplight. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice tight with horror. "I'll clean this immediately. I'll replace it, please. It's just a vase," Minho said, surprised by the intensity of her distress. "Don't worry about it." But she had already knelt down, carefully gathering the larger pieces with shaking hands, her expression stricken in a way that seemed disproportionate to the accident. He watched her for a moment, noticing the way she blinked rapidly as if fighting back tears, the rigidity in her shoulders that spoke of genuine fear. "Stop," he said quietly, and she froze, still kneeling, her head bowed. "You'll cut yourself. Leave it for now." "I can't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If Mrs. Park finds out, I can't afford to lose this position, sir. Please, I'll be more careful. I promise this won't happen again." There was something raw in her voice, a desperation that cut through the formal distance between their positions, and revealed the very real stakes this represented for her. He realized suddenly that in her world, this moment carried consequences he had never had to consider: lost wages, damaged reputation, possible dismissal. Things that for him would be meaningless, but for her could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. He crossed the room and knelt down beside her, ignoring her startled intake of breath at this unexpected breach of protocol. Together, they gathered the broken pieces in silence, his hands steady where hers trembled, placing them carefully on the tray she had brought. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already knew. She hesitated, then answered quietly, "Yoon Ji-woo, sir." "Ji-woo," he repeated, testing the way it felt to say it aloud. "How long have you worked here?" 3 months, sir." "And you're afraid of being fired over a broken vase?" She didn't answer, but the tension in her silence was answer enough. He stood, brushing off his hands, and reached for his phone. She watched him with obvious anxiety as he sent a brief message to his personal assistant, then turned back to her. "I've arranged for the vase to be charged to my personal account as an accidental breakage. There won't be any report to Mrs. Park. As far as anyone is concerned, I knocked it over myself and asked for it to be replaced." The relief that flooded her expression was so profound that he felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. She stood slowly, bowing deeply. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I don't know how to—" "You don't need to thank me," he said, cutting her off gently. "Just be more careful in the future." She nodded quickly, gathering the tray with the broken crystal and backing toward the door, still bowing. But just before she left, she paused and looked at him directly for the first time, her eyes meeting his with an intensity of gratitude that was almost uncomfortable in its sincerity. "You're very kind," she said softly. "Not many people in your position would have done that." Then she was gone, leaving him alone in the room with the faint scent of her simple soap and the strange, unsettled feeling that something had changed in a way he couldn't quite name. That night during the dinner party, he found his attention drifting despite the importance of the conversations happening around him. He nodded at appropriate moments, offered measured insights when required, played his role with the practiced ease of someone who had been performing it his entire life. But part of his mind remained elsewhere, replaying that moment in the sitting room, the vulnerability in her voice, the gratitude in her eyes, the way such a small gesture of decency had meant so much to her simply because kindness was apparently so rare in her experience. He realized he wanted to know more about her, where she had come from, what circumstances had brought her to this city, what dreams she harbored beneath that quiet, careful exterior. The realization troubled him because it suggested a personal interest that crossed boundaries he had always been careful to maintain. In the days that followed, he became more conscious of his awareness of her. He found himself choosing routes through the mansion that might coincide with her schedule. He began taking his morning coffee in different rooms, always with some plausible excuse, but privately acknowledging that he was hoping for another glimpse of her going about her work. He learned small details through observation, that she often looked tired in the mornings, suggesting she wasn't sleeping well, that she always carried a worn paperback book in her bag, reading during her brief breaks, that she had a habit of pausing sometimes to look out windows, her expression distant and faintly sad. He told himself repeatedly to stop this foolishness, to redirect his attention to matters that actually deserved it. He was the CEO of a multinational corporation. She was a housekeeper. The gulf between their worlds was not merely wide but fundamental, shaped by forces larger than either of them, governed by expectations and social structures that had existed long before their birth and would continue long after. Any interest he felt was inappropriate at best, exploitative at worst, the kind of thing that would cause harm regardless of intention. But knowing this didn't stop the pull he felt toward her, that strange magnetism that defied logic and propriety. It was a week before Christmas when he made the decision that would change everything. The mansion was being decorated for the holiday season, transformed into something resembling a winter palace with garlands and lights and carefully arranged displays of seasonal elegance. Minho had always found the holidays faintly oppressive, a time when the loneliness of his life became more difficult to ignore. As everyone around him spoke of family gatherings and celebrations he would attend only as a duty, never as a participant in genuine warmth. He saw Jiwoo one afternoon standing on a ladder in one of the guest rooms, hanging delicate glass ornaments on a tall tree that had been positioned near the windows. She was humming again, that same folk melody he had heard before, her movements careful as she placed each ornament with consideration, creating a pattern that was balanced without being rigid. She didn't notice him watching from the doorway. He stood there for several minutes, trying to understand what it was about her that had gotten under his skin so thoroughly. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in the way of the socialites and models who frequented his world. Her clothes were simple and worn. Her hands showed the evidence of hard work. There was nothing about her circumstances or presentation that should have captured his attention. But there was something in the way she existed in the world, a genuine quality, an absence of pretense, a resilience that didn't manifest as hardness, but as a quiet determination to find small moments of peace and beauty despite difficulty. It was that quality, he realized, that drew him. In a life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, who calculated their every interaction with strategic intent, she represented something refreshingly free of ulterior motive. She existed in his world without seeking to change her position in it, content to do her work well and go home to whatever life waited for her beyond these walls. The longing he felt was not merely attraction, though that was certainly present. It was something deeper and more complicated, a desire for the kind of simple, honest connection that his position made nearly impossible. He knew what he was about to do was unwise. He knew it crossed lines that existed for good reasons. But in that moment, standing in the doorway watching her hang ornaments on a tree, he found he no longer cared about the consequences. "Jiwoo," he said quietly. She startled, nearly dropping the ornament she was holding, and turned to look at him with surprise. She climbed down from the ladder quickly and bowed. "Sir, I didn't hear you come in. Do you need something from this room? I can finish this later." "No, stay," he said, moving into the room. "I wanted to ask you something." She looked uncertain but remained still, her hands clasped in front of her in that characteristic gesture of polite attention. He had rehearsed this conversation in his mind several times, but now that the moment had arrived, the carefully chosen words felt inadequate and false. He found himself speaking more directly than he had planned. "I would like to take you to dinner," he said. "Somewhere away from here, somewhere quiet, just the two of us." The shock on her face was complete and unguarded. She stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she didn't understand, her mouth opening slightly but no sound emerging. "I know this is unexpected," he continued, forcing himself to maintain eye contact despite his own uncertainty. "And I know it's complicated. But I'd like the chance to talk with you outside of this context, away from the roles we play here, if you're willing." She seemed to struggle for words, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and what might have been fear. "Sir, I don't understand. Why would you want to have dinner with me?" "Because I'd like to know you better," he said simply. "As a person, not as an employee. Because in the brief interactions we've had, you've struck me as someone genuine and kind, and those qualities are rare in my experience. Because I find myself thinking about you more often than I probably should. And I'd rather acknowledge that honestly than continue pretending it isn't happening." The silence that followed felt impossibly long. She looked down at her hands, then up at him again. Her expression conflicted in a way that suggested she was trying to navigate implications and consequences he could only guess at. "I don't think that would be appropriate," she said finally, her voice careful. "You're my employer. The power difference between us makes this... I can't tell if you're asking because you genuinely want to or because you expect me to say yes because refusing might cost me my job." Her directness surprised him, though it probably shouldn't have. It was exactly the kind of honest assessment he should have expected from someone who had already demonstrated a lack of pretense. "You're right to be cautious," he acknowledged. "And I can't prove my intentions except to say that your answer, whatever it is, will have no impact on your employment here. If you decline, we'll never speak of this again, and nothing will change. You have my word on that, for whatever it's worth to you." She studied his face as if trying to read the truth of his words there, her own expression troubled and thoughtful. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You must know dozens of women who would be more suitable for someone in your position. Women from your world who understand it. Why would you possibly be interested in someone like me? I can't explain it in a way that will make sense, he admitted. Maybe precisely because you're not from my world. Maybe because you don't want anything from me except to be left alone to do your work. Maybe because when I see you, I see someone who seems real? And that's something I haven't experienced in a very long time. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, there was a vulnerability in her expression that matched what he was feeling. This is a mistake, she said softly. For both of us. Nothing good can come from crossing this line. Probably not, he agreed, but I'm asking anyway. She looked away, her jaw working as if she were fighting some internal battle. When she spoke again, her voice was almost too quiet to hear. One dinner, somewhere very discreet, and afterward, we both agreed to forget it happened and return to the way things were before. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by the recognition that she was right. This was likely a mistake that would complicate both their lives in ways neither could fully anticipate. But he found he didn't care. One dinner, he agreed. I'll arrange everything. They stood there for a moment longer, the weight of what they had just agreed to settling over them like snow. Then she bowed slightly and turned back to her work, climbing the ladder once more to resume hanging ornaments, though her hands now trembled faintly with what might have been nerves or fear, or something else entirely. Minho left the room before he could say anything else that might shatter the fragile agreement they had reached, his heart beating harder than it had in any boardroom negotiation, aware that he had just set in motion something he could not control and could not predict. He spent the next 3 days making arrangements with a meticulousness that bordered on obsessive. He chose a restaurant in a quiet neighborhood far from the areas where anyone in his social circle might appear, a small place known for its excellent food and its respect for privacy. He reserved a private room at the back, accessible through a separate entrance. He arranged for his driver to pick her up several blocks from the mansion to avoid any possibility of staff seeing them leave together. Every detail was considered and reconsidered, not out of shame, but out of a genuine desire to protect her from the scrutiny and gossip that would inevitably follow if their dinner became known. On the evening they had agreed upon, he found himself experiencing something close to nervousness, a feeling so unfamiliar that it took him several minutes to identify it. He dressed carefully in clothes that were elegant but not ostentatious, wanting to appear approachable rather than intimidating. He arrived at the restaurant early, waiting in the private room and trying to calm the restless energy that made sitting still nearly impossible. When she arrived, escorted by the restaurant's owner who had been well compensated for his discretion, he stood immediately. She looked different outside the context of the mansion, wearing a simple dark dress that was clearly her best but showed signs of age, her hair pulled back loosely, her expression nervous but composed. She had made an effort, he realized, and the thought touched him more than any elaborate preparation would have. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She sat slowly, her movements careful, her eyes taking in the room with its elegant simplicity, the table set with understated refinement, the soft lighting that created an atmosphere of intimacy without oppression. "I've never been anywhere like this," she said quietly. "I feel out of place." "You look perfect," he said, and meant it. "Please, try to relax. This isn't a business dinner or a formal occasion. It's just two people sharing a meal and conversation." She nodded, but didn't look entirely convinced. The first few minutes were awkward, filled with the kind of stilted small talk that neither of them seemed comfortable with. He asked about her day. She gave brief, careful answers. She asked about his work. He deflected with generalities. They both seemed hyper-aware of the strangeness of the situation, the boundaries they were crossing, the risk inherent in even this small intimacy. But gradually, as the first course arrived and the wine began to ease some of the tension, the conversation started to flow more naturally. He asked about her background, and she told him about growing up in a small village in the countryside, the daughter of farmers who had worked land that had been in the family for generations. She spoke of her childhood with a gentle nostalgia, describing seasons marked by planting and harvest, festivals in the village square, the simple rhythms of rural life. "It sounds peaceful," he said. It was, she agreed. But it was also difficult in ways people from cities don't always understand. The work was endless and hard. Money was always scarce. When my parents died in a car accident 3 years ago, my younger brother and I tried to keep the farm going. But we were already in debt, and the droughts that year destroyed most of the crops. We lost everything." Her voice remained steady as she said this, but he could hear the weight of loss beneath the words, the kind of grief that had been metabolized into acceptance without ever fully healing. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate but sincere. She shrugged slightly. "Life happens. We survived. My brother found work in a factory, but he was exposed to chemicals there without proper protection and developed a respiratory illness. That's why we came to Seoul. The treatments he needs are only available here, and they're expensive, so I work, and we manage. That's why the job at the mansion matters so much to you," he said, understanding clicking into place. "Yes, the salary is higher than anything I could earn elsewhere with my education level. If I can keep it for another 2 years, I'll have enough saved to cover his final treatments and maybe put something aside for us to start over somewhere. It's not much of a dream, but it's what I have." The matter-of-fact way she described this struggle, without self-pity or resentment, struck him with unexpected force. He had lived his entire life insulated from the kind of precarious existence she navigated daily, where a broken vase could mean disaster, where illness meant impossible choices, where dreams were measured not in ambitions, but in the hope of simple stability. "What about you?" she asked, turning the attention back to him. "Everyone knows your name, your company, your success. But what's your life actually like?" He found himself speaking more honestly than he had intended, describing the isolation of his position, the constant pressure of expectations, the way every relationship in his life felt transactional and conditional. He told her about growing up knowing he had no choice but to take over the family business, about the loss of his mother when he was young and the distant, demanding relationship with his father, who had viewed him primarily as a successor to be molded. He spoke of the loneliness that came with power, the way it created distance between himself and everyone around him, the difficulty of knowing whether people valued him for himself or for what he represented. "Sometimes I feel like I'm watching my own life from outside," he admitted. "Going through the motions of what's expected, playing a role that was written before I was born. Everything is carefully controlled and predetermined. There's no spontaneity, no genuine surprise, no real connection." She listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful and empathetic in a way that felt profoundly different from the calculated sympathy he usually encountered. "That sounds exhausting," she said quietly. "And lonely." "It is," he agreed, surprised by how relieved he felt to acknowledge it aloud. They talked for hours as the meal progressed, the conversation deepening in ways that felt almost effortless, despite the vast differences in their backgrounds. She asked him about his interests beyond work, and he found himself describing a love of classical music he rarely had occasion to indulge, a half-finished novel he had been writing in stolen moments for years but would never show anyone, a desire to travel not for business, but simply to see places that existed outside the narrow circuits of his professional life. She told him about the books she loved, the small pleasures that sustained her, walking through parks on her day off, writing letters to friends from her village, the way light looked on water, the satisfaction of work done well. She spoke of these things with a genuine appreciation that made them seem more valuable than any luxury he had ever experienced. At some point during the evening, he realized he was happier than he had been in years, engaged in a way that felt authentic and unguarded. The nervousness had faded, replaced by something warmer and more substantial. He found himself watching the way her eyes lit up when she talked about things she cared about, the small gestures of her hands as she spoke, the occasional laugh that seemed to surprise her as much as it delighted him. When the meal finally concluded and the restaurant owner discreetly indicated that they were approaching closing time, Minho felt a sharp reluctance to let the evening end. They stood in the small private room, neither seeming quite ready to move toward the door, the weight of return to reality hanging between them. "Thank you for this," Jiwoo said softly. "It was unexpected, but I'm glad I came." "So am I," he said. "More than I can express." She looked up at him, her expression conflicted and vulnerable. "But we both know this can't continue. Tonight was a gift, but it's not sustainable. Our lives are too different. The complications are too great." "I know," he said, though the acknowledgement felt like a defeat. "But I don't regret it, and I hope you don't either." I don't, she whispered. But that almost makes it harder. They stood there for a moment longer, the air between them charged with unspoken longing and the painful recognition of impossibility. Then she turned and moved toward the door, and he followed her out into the cold December night where his car waited to take her back to her small rented room and him back to his empty mansion. They didn't speak during the drive, sitting on opposite sides of the back seat, both staring out their respective windows at the city passing by. When they reached the designated drop-off point several blocks from the mansion, she turned to him one final time. "Good night, Mr. Kang," she said, her use of the formal title a clear signal that she was already rebuilding the boundaries between them. "Good night, Jiwoo," he replied, unable to bring himself to match her formality. She stepped out of the car and walked away without looking back, her figure growing smaller and more indistinct until she disappeared around a corner. Minho remained in the car for a long time afterward, staring at the empty street, trying to process the strange mixture of fulfillment and loss he felt. He had told himself it would be enough, one evening of genuine connection, one brief escape from the loneliness that defined his life. He had told himself he could return to the way things were before, that this small transgression wouldn't fundamentally change anything. But as the days passed and he found himself constantly aware of her presence in the mansion, constantly hoping for accidental encounters, constantly replaying their conversation in his mind, he realized that he had been catastrophically wrong. The dinner had not satisfied his interest in her. It had deepened it immeasurably, transformed it from a vague attraction into something more specific and consuming. Now he knew the sound of her laugh, the thoughts behind her quiet demeanor, the dreams she harbored, and the losses she carried. She was no longer an abstraction or a fantasy, but a real person with depth and complexity, and that knowledge made his feelings for her both more profound and more painful. He tried to maintain distance, to honor the implicit agreement they had made that the dinner would be an isolated incident. But he found it increasingly difficult to focus on work, increasingly impatient with the meaningless social obligations that filled his calendar, increasingly aware of the hollowness that permeated every other interaction in his life. He began finding excuses to be in parts of the mansion where she worked, telling himself he was simply reviewing household operations, but knowing he was seeking opportunities to see her. Their encounters were brief and formal, always observed by other staff, both of them careful to maintain appropriate distance. But sometimes their eyes would meet, and in those fleeting moments, he would see his own struggle reflected in her expression, the desire to acknowledge what had passed between them, warring with the necessity of pretending it never happened. It was torment of a particular kind, made worse by the fact that he had chosen it himself. The other staff began to notice his increased presence in areas he normally never visited. He overheard whispered conversations that stopped when he approached, saw the speculative glances exchanged between the housekeepers and kitchen workers. Mrs. Park, ever vigilant, seemed to watch him with heightened scrutiny, her expression suggesting she sensed something amiss even if she couldn't identify what. He knew he should be more careful, more discreet, but he found himself increasingly reckless in ways that troubled him. He began requesting that Jiwoo specifically handle certain tasks that would bring her into contact with him, bringing documents to his office, serving tea during his rare at-home meetings, attending to the maintenance of rooms he actually used. These requests were unusual enough to raise eyebrows, but not so blatant as to confirm suspicions. Jiwoo accepted these assignments without comment, but he could see the tension in her posture, the careful neutrality of her expression, the way she avoided eye contact whenever possible. She was suffering too, he realized. The difference was that she had far more to lose if their connection became known, and she was more disciplined in her efforts to suppress it. It was during one of these arranged encounters, when she brought tea to his study late one evening, that the fragile equilibrium finally cracked. He thanked her and she turned to leave, but he found himself speaking before he could stop himself. "Wait," he said. She paused but didn't turn around, her hand still on the door handle. "I can't stop thinking about that dinner," he said quietly. "About our conversation, about you. I know I'm not supposed to say this. I know we agreed to forget it happened, but I can't pretend anymore that I'm succeeding at that." Her shoulders tensed, but she still didn't turn to face him. "Please don't do this," she whispered. "I don't want to make your life more difficult," he continued. "But I need you to know that what I'm feeling isn't casual or fleeting. It's not some passing fascination with someone different from my usual world. When I'm with you, even in these brief, formal exchanges, I feel more alive than I do during any other part of my life. That has to mean something. It means we're both lonely, she said, her voice strained. It means we found a moment of connection that felt good because our lives are hard in different ways. But it doesn't change the reality of who we are and where we stand. You're Kang Min-ho, CEO of a major corporation, heir to a dynasty. I am Yoon Ji-woo, a housekeeper who cleans your guest rooms. Those aren't just different circumstances, they're different worlds. I don't care about that, he said. She finally turned to face him, and he was startled by the anger flashing in her eyes. But I do, because when this inevitably falls apart, and it will, you'll return to your life essentially unchanged. You might feel sad for a while, maybe even genuinely hurt. But your position, your reputation, your future, they'll all remain intact. I, on the other hand, will lose everything. My job, my reputation, my ability to find similar work elsewhere. The money I need to save for my brother's treatment. Everything I've been working toward. And beyond the practical consequences, I'll be the one who gets labeled as the opportunistic servant who tried to seduce her employer. Not you. Never you. That's the reality we're living in. The truth of her words hit him with unexpected force. In his focus on his own feelings, on the connection he felt to her, he had not fully considered the asymmetry of risk between them. His privilege had blinded him to the very real danger he was creating for her simply by pursuing his own desires. I would never let that happen to you, he said. I would protect you. How? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. By making me your mistress? By setting me up in some apartment where I wait for your occasional visits while rumors spread and everyone knows exactly what I am? By elevating me into a world where I'll never belong, where people will always see me as the gold digger who trapped a wealthy man? Or by continuing as we are, having secret meetings that become progressively harder to hide until inevitably someone discovers us and I'm dismissed in disgrace while you face nothing worse than gossip? He had no answer because every scenario she described was essentially accurate. There was no path forward that didn't involve her bearing the greater burden of consequence. I'm sorry, he said finally. You're right. I've been selfish. I've been thinking about what I want without fully considering what it would cost you. Some of the anger faded from her expression, replaced by sadness. I don't think you're being intentionally cruel. I think you're genuinely lonely and you found something with me that felt real. I felt it too. That dinner was one of the best evenings I've had in years. But that's exactly why we have to stop this now, before it goes any further. Because the more time we spend together, the harder it will become to maintain boundaries, and the more catastrophic it will be when those boundaries inevitably collapse. So we just pretend we feel nothing? He asked. Continue existing in the same space as strangers? Yes, she said firmly, because that's the only responsible choice. You asked me to dinner knowing it was inappropriate, and I accepted knowing it was a mistake. We both got something we needed from that evening, but now we need to be adults and recognize that it can't continue. She was right, and he knew it. But knowing it didn't make accepting it any easier. I understand, he said quietly. I'll stop requesting your presence for these tasks. I'll keep my distance. I won't put you in difficult positions anymore. Relief flickered across her face, followed immediately by something that looked like grief. Thank you, she whispered. She turned and left before he could say anything else, closing the door softly behind her. He stood alone in his study, surrounded by the trappings of success and power, feeling more isolated than he had before he met her, before he learned what genuine connection could feel like, before he understood exactly what he was missing in his carefully constructed life. He tried to honor his promise. He stopped finding excuses to be near her, stopped requesting her presence, stopped seeking out those brief encounters that had become both his greatest pleasure and his deepest torment. He threw himself into work with renewed intensity, accepting additional responsibilities, taking on new projects, filling every available hour with activity designed to exhaust him enough that he might finally stop thinking about her. But the mansion felt different now, haunted by her presence even when he couldn't see her. He would walk through halls she had cleaned and imagine her working there. He would see flowers arranged in vases and wonder if she had chosen them. He would hear the distant sound of footsteps or voices and strain to identify hers among them. She had permeated the space in ways he couldn't escape, made herself integral to his environment simply by existing within it. The staff noticed the change in his behavior too, though they interpreted it differently than the reality. Some thought he was dealing with business pressures. Others whispered that he might be having romantic troubles, perhaps a relationship ending badly. Mrs. Park seemed to sense something closer to the truth, watching him with knowing disapproval, though she said nothing directly. It was 3 weeks after their last real conversation, in the depths of January when winter had settled into something bleak and unrelenting, that the carefully maintained distance finally shattered in a way neither of them could have anticipated. Jiwoo's younger brother Jinho collapsed at his factory job and was rushed to the hospital with complications from his respiratory illness. The call came in the middle of her shift, and she left the mansion in a state of barely controlled panic, her face white with fear, her hands shaking as she gathered her things. Minho learned about it when he overheard kitchen staff discussing it later that afternoon, their voices hushed with sympathy, but also with the slightly detached quality of people for whom someone else's crisis was primarily a source of gossip. He immediately called his personal assistant and obtained the name of the hospital, then made arrangements that he didn't fully think through, driven by a need to do something, anything, to help her in this moment of crisis. He arrived at the hospital that evening and found her in a waiting room, sitting alone on a plastic chair, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes red from crying. She looked up when he approached, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and then a kind of desperate gratitude that broke through all her carefully maintained defenses. "How did you know I was here?" she asked. "I heard at the mansion," he said, sitting down beside her. "What's his condition?" "They don't know yet," she said, her voice unsteady. "They're running tests. His lungs are failing. They might need to put him on a ventilator." The doctor said, "He said the treatments we've been doing aren't working fast enough, that we should have started more aggressive therapy months ago, but it's so expensive and I've been trying to save up enough to afford it and now it might be too late." She pressed her hands to her face, fighting for composure, her whole body trembling with the effort of holding herself together. Without thinking, Minho reached out and pulled her into an embrace, and she collapsed against him, finally allowing herself to break in a way she clearly hadn't been able to when alone. They sat like that for a long time, her quiet sobs muffled against his shoulder, his arms around her, offering the only comfort he could provide in that moment. Other people in the waiting room glanced at them occasionally but looked away, granting them the privacy that distress deserved. Eventually, her crying subsided into exhausted silence. She pulled back slightly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize," he said firmly. "There's nothing to apologize for. Tell me about the treatments the doctor mentioned, the ones that are too expensive." She explained in halting detail about an advanced therapy that involved specialized medications and equipment, a course of treatment that would cost more than she could earn in 3 years of her current salary. Insurance would cover some of it, but the co-payments and uncovered expenses would still be astronomical, far beyond anything she could manage. Minho listened carefully, his mind already working through solutions. When she finished, he said simply, "I'll cover it." She stared at him, not seeming to comprehend at first. "What?" "Whatever the treatments cost, whatever insurance doesn't cover, I'll pay for it, all of it, starting immediately." "No," she said, shaking her head vehemently. "No, I can't accept that. It's too much. I could never repay you." "I don't want repayment," he said. "Your brother needs medical care. I have the resources to provide it. That's all that matters." "It's not that simple," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Don't you see? If you do this, it changes everything between us. I'll be in your debt in a way I can never escape. Every interaction we have from now on will be colored by this enormous thing you did for me. It turns our relationship into something transactional, something I never wanted it to become. Would you rather let your brother suffer because accepting help feels too complicated?" he asked, more harshly than he intended. She flinched as if he had struck her, and immediately he regretted his tone. "I'm sorry," he said. "That was unfair. But Jiwoo, please listen to me. I'm not offering this to create a debt or to gain leverage over you. I'm offering because I care about you, and I can't stand knowing you're suffering when I have the power to help. If you never speak to me again after this, if you maintain every boundary and distance you've established, that's fine. I'll accept it. But please let me do this one thing. Please don't let pride or fear of obligation prevent you from getting your brother the care he needs." She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face again, her whole posture radiating conflict and exhaustion. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate feeling powerless. I hate that I can't take care of my own family. I hate that I have to accept charity from someone who already holds so much power over my life." "It's not charity," he said gently. "It's care. There's a difference." She opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression that held both gratitude and resentment, love and fear, acceptance and resistance all mixed together in a way that reflected the impossible complexity of their situation. "Okay," she said finally, the word seeming to cost her everything. "Okay, I accept. For Jinho. Not for me." "For Jinho," he agreed. He made the arrangements that night, speaking directly with the hospital's financial department and the medical team, ensuring that Jinho would receive every treatment the doctors recommended without any concern for cost. He established an account to cover all expenses, present and future, and made it clear that the family was not to be billed for anything beyond what their insurance covered. Jinho stabilized over the following days and began the new treatment protocol. The doctors were optimistic about his chances with this more aggressive approach, suggesting that he might recover function he had already lost and prevent further deterioration. Jiwoo spent every moment she wasn't working at his bedside, and Minho made sure the mansion gave her as much flexibility as possible with her schedule, though he made these arrangements through intermediaries to avoid drawing attention to his personal involvement. He visited the hospital twice more over the next week, always in the evenings, always careful to come at times when fewer people would be present. He and Jiwoo would sit together in the waiting room or her brother's room when Jinho was sleeping, talking in quiet voices about nothing in particular, both of them pretending that this wasn't deepening their connection in ways that would make separation even harder. Jinho, when awake, regarded Minho with open curiosity and gradual warmth. He was 22, with a gentle disposition similar to his sister's but more openly optimistic despite his illness. He seemed to sense that there was something significant between Jiwoo and this wealthy man who had appeared suddenly to save his life, but he was tactful enough not to ask direct questions. "You've been very kind to my sister," Jinho said to Minho one evening when Jiwoo had stepped out to speak with a nurse. "She doesn't talk about it much, but I can tell you've made a difference in her life beyond just the medical bills." "She's made a difference in mine too," Minho admitted. Jinho studied him thoughtfully. "She carries a lot of weight, you know. She always has, even before our parents died. She thinks she has to be strong for everyone else, that she can't let herself need anything. It makes her lonely, I think, even though she'd never say it." "I've noticed," Minho said quietly. "I'm glad she has someone who sees that," Jinho said. "Whatever happens between you two, I'm glad she's not alone anymore, even if she won't admit it." Jiwoo returned before Minho could respond, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. But Jinho's words stayed with him, adding another layer of complexity to feelings that were already difficult to navigate. It was inevitable that the staff at the mansion would begin to notice the changes. Jiwoo's frequent absences to visit her brother, the flexibility she was being granted, the fact that Minho had been seen at the same hospital she frequented, these details accumulated into a pattern that raised questions. The whispers started subtly, passing between housekeepers during breaks, mentioned in careful voices in the kitchen, discussed in the cramped staff quarters where people went to rest between shifts. At first, the rumors were relatively innocent speculation about whether Minho had a personal interest in Jiwoo's well-being. But as time passed and more observations were added to the collective knowledge, the whispers grew more pointed and more unkind. Some suggested Jiwoo was manipulating Minho's sympathies to gain advantages and special treatment. Others speculated that she was using her brother's illness to extract money from a man too lonely and naive to see through her schemes. A few, more charitably, thought perhaps a genuine romance was developing, but expressed concern about the complications such a relationship would create. Mrs. Park listened to these whispers with increasing displeasure. She had maintained order in the household for 2 decades by enforcing strict boundaries and professional conduct. The possibility that a romance might be developing between her employer and a junior housekeeper represented exactly the kind of disruption she had always worked to prevent. She confronted Jiwoo one afternoon in the servants' hall, closing the door to ensure privacy before speaking in a tone that was cold, but not openly hostile. "I think you need to be very careful about your position here," Mrs. Park said without preamble. "There are rumors circulating about you and Mr. Kang. I don't know if they're based in truth, and I'm not asking you to confirm or deny anything. But I am telling you that if those rumors continue to spread, they will damage both your reputation and his. More importantly, they will damage the household's functioning and morale." Jiwoo's face went pale, but she met Mrs. Park's gaze steadily. "I've done nothing inappropriate with Mr. Kang. He's been kind enough to help with my brother's medical expenses, but that's the extent of our interaction beyond my normal duties." "And yet he visits your brother in the hospital," Mrs. Park said. "And yet you've been granted scheduling flexibility no other staff member receives. And yet Mr. Kang seems to have taken a personal interest in your welfare that goes beyond normal employer concern. You can see how this might appear to others." "I can't control what others choose to believe," Jiwoo said quietly. "I can only control my own actions, and I've done nothing wrong." "Perhaps not technically," Mrs. Park allowed, "but perception matters in a household like this. The other staff are watching and talking. Some are jealous of the special treatment you appear to be receiving. Others are concerned that your relationship with Mr. Kang might create complications that affect all of us. I need you to understand that maintaining appropriate distance isn't just about following rules. It's about protecting the stability of everyone's employment here." Jiwoo nodded slowly, though her expression was troubled. "I understand." "Do you?" Mrs. Park asked sharply. "Because from where I'm standing, you seem to be walking a very dangerous line. Mr. Kang may have good intentions, but his position means his actions carry weight he may not fully appreciate. And you, whether intentionally or not, are in a position to cause significant disruption. I'm not unsympathetic to your situation with your brother, but I need to know that you recognize the broader implications of what's happening." "I do recognize them," Jiwoo said, her voice steady despite the emotion Minho could see her struggling to contain. "And I've been trying to maintain appropriate boundaries. If others choose to interpret kindness as something more, that's beyond my control." Mrs. Park studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Very well. I've said what needed to be said. How you proceed from here is your decision. But know that I'll be watching, and if this situation escalates in ways that threaten the household, I will take action." The conversation left Jiwoo shaken in ways that became apparent when Minho saw her later that day. She was going through her duties with mechanical efficiency, her expression closed off, her movements rigid with tension. When he approached her to ask if everything was all right, she barely looked at him. "We can't keep doing this," she said quietly. "The staff are talking. Mrs. Park confronted me. Everyone knows something is happening between us, and it's creating exactly the problems I warned you about." "What did Mrs. Park say?" he asked, anger rising at the thought of her being questioned or intimidated. "She said what needed to be said," Jiwoo replied. "That my relationship with you is causing disruption and speculation. That people think I'm taking advantage of you, or that you're taking advantage of me. That my position here is becoming untenable because we haven't been as careful as we thought." "I'll speak to Mrs. Park," he said. "I'll make it clear that this is not your fault and that any consequences should fall on me." "That won't help," she said, frustration breaking through her composure. "Don't you understand? You can't fix this with authority or money. The damage is already done. The moment we crossed that line and had dinner together, we set this in motion. Every kindness you've shown me since has only made it worse. The medical bills, the hospital visits, the special scheduling, it all just confirms what people suspect." "Which is what, exactly?" he asked. "That I care about someone who works for me? That I saw someone struggling and chose to help? Why should that be scandalous?" "Because of who we are to each other," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Because I'm young and female and you're powerful and single. Because people's minds go to certain places when they see those dynamics, and nothing we say will change that. Because in their eyes, There are only a few possible explanations for why a man in your position would take such interest in a woman in mine, and none of those explanations are innocent. She was right, and he knew it. The unfairness of it burned. That his genuine care for her would be interpreted through such a cynical lens, that her acceptance of necessary help for her brother would be twisted into evidence of manipulation or impropriety. But unfair or not, it was the reality they were living in. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. "I want to go back in time and never accept your dinner invitation," she said. "I want to have never gotten close enough to you to care. But since I can't do that, I want you to stop trying to help me. Stop visiting the hospital. Stop making special arrangements for my schedule. Stop treating me differently than any other employee. Let the rumors die down by proving there's nothing to them. And your brother's treatments? I'll accept that because backing out now would harm him," she said. "But nothing else. No more visits, no more conversations beyond what's necessary for my work. We go back to being strangers who happen to exist in the same space." The pain in her voice told him how much this cost her, that she was asking for this not because she wanted it, but because she saw no other viable path forward. And perhaps she was right. Perhaps the kindest thing he could do for her now was to create the distance she was asking for, to remove himself as a source of complication in her life. But even as he recognized this intellectually, everything in him rebelled against it. "If that's what you need," he said finally. She nodded, not meeting his eyes, and returned to her work without another word. Minho kept his promise for exactly 5 days. During those 5 days, he avoided the parts of the mansion where she worked, declined to request her presence for any tasks, and did not return to the hospital despite his ongoing concern for Jinho's recovery. He tried to lose himself in work again, to redirect his focus to the countless demands of running a major corporation, to pretend that the hollowness he felt was just normal exhaustion rather than the specific absence of her presence in his life. But on the 6th day, he received a message from the hospital that Jinho had taken a sudden turn for the worse, developing complications that required emergency intervention. Minho called Jiwoo's phone immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. She was likely in the hospital where cell phones weren't permitted in certain areas. He tried to focus on the meeting he was supposed to be conducting, but every minute that passed without news increased his anxiety to the point where concentration became impossible. He excused himself from the meeting with a terse explanation and drove to the hospital, knowing he was breaking his promise but unable to stop himself. He found Jiwoo in a different waiting room this time, surrounded by several doctors who were explaining something to her in calm but serious tones. She looked devastated, her face pale, her eyes wide with barely suppressed terror. When the doctors finished speaking and moved away, Minho approached her slowly. She looked up and saw him, and something in her expression crumbled. "He's not going to make it," she whispered. "They said the treatment worked too late. His lungs are too damaged. They can keep him comfortable, but there's nothing more they can do." Minho sat down beside her and took her hand, no longer caring who saw or what they thought. She gripped his hand with desperate strength, as if he were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world in that moment. They sat together for hours as Jinho's condition deteriorated. The medical staff allowed them into his room during his final hours, and Minho remained present, standing quietly in the corner while Jiwoo sat by her brother's bedside, holding his hand, speaking to him in soft, breaking voices about their childhood, their parents, all the good memories they had shared. Jinho died just before dawn, slipping away peacefully with his sister's hand in his. The grief that overcame Jiwoo was profound and devastating, and Minho held her as she sobbed, providing the only support he could offer in the face of a loss that nothing could mitigate. He handled all the arrangements for Jinho's funeral, understanding that in her state of shock and grief, practical decisions would be overwhelming. He paid for everything: the cremation, the memorial service, the transportation of Jinho's ashes back to their village for burial near their parents. He did all of this quietly, without seeking acknowledgement, driven simply by the need to ease her burden in any way he could. The funeral was small, attended mostly by a few friends Jinho had made in Seoul and some distant relatives who made the journey from the countryside. Minho attended as well, standing at the back of the room, watching as Jiwoo delivered a eulogy in a voice that shook but never broke completely. speaking of her brother's kindness, his courage in facing his illness, the love he had shown to everyone who knew him. Afterward, as people offered condolences and drifted away, Minho approached her slowly. She looked utterly exhausted, hollowed out by grief and the strain of maintaining composure through the ceremony. "Thank you for being here," she said quietly. "You didn't have to come." "I wanted to," he said. "Jinho was a good person. I'm sorry I didn't get to know him better." "He liked you," she said, a sad smile flickering across her face. "He told me he thought you made me happy, even if I wouldn't admit it." They stood together in silence for a moment, the weight of loss hanging between them. "What will you do now?" Minho asked. She shook her head slowly. "I don't know. Return to work, I suppose. Try to figure out what my life looks like without him. He was the reason I came to Seoul, the reason I took the job at your mansion. Now that he's gone, I'm not sure what I'm doing here anymore." "You're here because it's where your life is now," Minho said. "Because you've built something here, even if it wasn't the future you originally imagined." "Have I?" she asked, her voice distant. "Or have I just been marking time, surviving, but not really living?" He had no answer for that, because he recognized the question as one he had been asking himself for years. Jiwoo returned to work a week after the funeral, insisting that she needed routine and structure to avoid drowning in grief. But something had changed in her, a brittleness that hadn't been there before, as if she were held together by will alone and any additional pressure might shatter her completely. The staff treated her with cautious sympathy, the earlier rumors temporarily set aside in the face of genuine tragedy. But the underlying tensions hadn't disappeared. They had merely been suspended, waiting to resurface once the immediate crisis passed. Minho watched her struggle from a distance, wanting desperately to help, but aware that his presence might only complicate things further. He found himself caught in an impossible situation, caring deeply for someone he couldn't be with, wanting to support her, but knowing his attention only made her situation more difficult, bound by social structures and expectations that seemed designed specifically to prevent the kind of connection they had found. It was Mrs. Park who finally forced the issue to its breaking point. She requested a private meeting with Minho in his office, arriving with the kind of formal gravity that suggested she had been planning this conversation for some time. She stood before his desk, her posture rigid, her expression carefully neutral. "I need to speak with you about Yoon Ji-woo," she said without preamble. "What about her?" Minho asked, his tone guarded. "The situation has become untenable," Mrs. Park said bluntly. "The other staff members are increasingly uncomfortable with the special treatment she receives and the perception, accurate or not, that she has an inappropriate relationship with you. Her continued employment here is creating division and undermining the professional environment I've worked hard to maintain." "Jiwoo has done nothing wrong," Minho said, his voice cold. "If other staff members choose to gossip and speculate, that's their failing, not hers." "With respect, sir, that's naive," Mrs. Park said, her own tone hardening. "Whether or not anything inappropriate has actually occurred between you and her is almost irrelevant at this point. The perception exists, and perception shapes reality in a household like this. Her presence here has become disruptive in ways that affect everyone's ability to do their jobs effectively." "Are you suggesting I fire her?" Minho asked, anger rising in his chest. "I'm suggesting that she be reassigned to a different property or offered a generous severance package that would allow her to seek employment elsewhere," Mrs. Park said. "I've prepared documentation showing that this is a matter of household management, not personal conduct, which would protect both her professional reputation and yours." "Absolutely not," Minho said flatly. "She stays." Mrs. Park's expression tightened. "Then you leave me no choice but to be more direct. Your relationship with this woman, whatever its precise nature, is inappropriate given your respective positions. It places her in a vulnerable situation where she cannot refuse your attention without risking her livelihood. It creates the appearance of favoritism that damages morale among the other staff. And it subjects both of you to gossip and speculation that will only grow worse the longer it continues. I have a duty to protect the integrity of this household and the well-being of all its staff, including her. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions, even when they're not what anyone wants." Minho stood, placing his hands flat on the desk, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. Let me be very clear, Mrs. Park. Jiwoo is not going anywhere unless she chooses to leave of her own accord. Any attempt to pressure her toward resignation or to create a hostile work environment that forces her out will result in your own immediate dismissal. I appreciate your years of service to this household, but on this matter, your judgment is compromised by outdated prejudices and an excessive concern for appearances over substance. Mrs. Park's face flushed with anger, but she maintained her composure. Then you're making a mistake, sir. One that will harm both of you far more than any action I might take. But if that's your decision, I'll abide by it. For now. She turned and left without being dismissed, the door closing behind her with controlled force that somehow conveyed more displeasure than slamming it would have. Minho sat back down slowly, his hands shaking slightly with residual anger. He knew he had just damaged, possibly irreparably, his relationship with the woman who had managed his household for 2 decades. He knew Mrs. Park's concerns were not entirely without merit, even if her proposed solution was unacceptable. And he knew that his defense of Jiwoo had likely confirmed every suspicion the staff harbored about the nature of their relationship. But the alternative, allowing her to be forced out, to lose her position because of his interest in her, was something he simply couldn't accept. Word of the confrontation spread through the household with predictable speed. By that evening, everyone knew that Minho had defended Jiwoo against Mrs. Park's recommendation for her dismissal. The implications were debated in hushed conversations in the servants' quarters and whispered exchanges in the kitchen. Some saw it as proof of a romantic relationship. Others viewed it as favoritism taken to an unreasonable extreme. A few, very few, thought perhaps he was simply trying to protect someone who had been unfairly targeted by gossip. Jiwoo herself learned about it when one of the other housekeepers, a woman named Sora, who had always been marginally friendly, pulled her aside during an evening break. "You need to be careful," Sora said quietly. "People are saying that Mr. Kang refused to let Mrs. Park fire you, that he got angry and threatened her job when she suggested you should leave. Do you understand what that looks like to everyone else?" Jiwoo's face went white. "He did what?" "You didn't know?" Sora asked, looking genuinely surprised. "I thought you two were... Well, I thought you would have known." "No," Jiwoo said, her voice hollow. "I had no idea." She found Minho that night in his study, entering without knocking in a breach of protocol that reflected the extremity of her emotional state. He looked up from his work, surprise flickering across his face. "Is it true?" she demanded without preamble. "That Mrs. Park wanted to fire me and you refused to allow it?" He stood slowly. "Yes." "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Every person in this household now thinks we're sleeping together. They think I have you wrapped around my finger, that I've manipulated you into protecting me. My reputation is completely destroyed." "Your reputation should never have been in question in the first place," he said. "You've done nothing wrong. I won't allow you to be punished for other people's malicious speculation." "But that's exactly what's happened," she shouted, tears beginning to stream down her face. "By defending me, by making it clear that you care what happens to me, you've confirmed everything they suspected. You've made it impossible for me to continue working here with any dignity. How am I supposed to look the other staff members in the eye? How am I supposed to do my job when everyone thinks I'm only here because I'm sleeping with the boss?" "Then quit," he said, the words emerging before he fully thought them through. "Leave this job. Let me support you while you figure out what you want to do next. You don't have to stay in a position that makes you miserable." "So I can be your kept woman?" she asked bitterly. "That's your solution? To turn their suspicions into reality?" "That's not what I'm suggesting," he said, though part of him knew it was exactly what he was suggesting, even if he framed it differently in his own mind. "Yes, it is," she said, her voice breaking. "You're asking me to give up my independence, to become financially dependent on you, to step into exactly the role everyone already thinks I occupy. Don't you see how impossible this is? I can't stay here with everyone thinking I'm your mistress, but I can't leave and accept your support without actually becoming what they think I am. There's no path forward that doesn't involve me losing my dignity or my independence or both." "I don't care about any of that," he said, moving toward her. "I care about you. I want you in my life, whatever form that takes. We can figure out the details, find some arrangement that works for both of us. Listen to yourself, she said, stepping back. You're a billionaire CEO offering to take care of a poor housekeeper. Do you really not hear how that sounds? How inherently unequal that relationship would be? I'm not some damsel who needs rescuing. I'm a person who wants to build her own life on her own terms, and you're asking me to give that up to become an appendage to yours. That's not what I want, he protested. Maybe not intentionally, she said, more gently now, but it's the inevitable result of the power difference between us. You have so much: wealth, influence, freedom, and I have so little. Any relationship we try to build starts from that fundamental inequality. And no matter how much you might want to treat me as an equal, the reality is that I never will be, not in any practical sense. I love you, he said, the words emerging raw and unplanned. She closed her eyes, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. That almost makes it worse, because I think I love you too. But love isn't enough when the world we live in is determined to destroy any connection we try to build. Love doesn't erase the power difference or the social judgment or the practical impossibility of our situation. Then what do we do? He asked helplessly. I don't know, she admitted. But I can't keep living like this, working in your house, seeing you every day, pretending I don't feel what I feel while everyone around us gossips and speculates. It's tearing me apart. They stood facing each other across the study, the gulf between them feeling wider than ever despite the declarations of love that hung in the air. I need some time, she said finally. Time away from this house, from you, from all of it. I need to figure out what I want my life to be without the weight of your presence influencing every decision. How long? He asked. I don't know, as long as it takes. She left that night, gathering her few possessions from the small room she occupied in the servants' quarters and disappearing into the city. Minho wanted to follow her, to continue the conversation, to somehow find the right words that would make everything align. But he recognized that doing so would only prove her point about his inability to respect her boundaries when they conflicted with his desires. So he let her go, and the mansion felt emptier than it ever had before. The days that followed were some of the most difficult of Minho's life. He moved through his responsibilities mechanically, attending meetings without really being present, making decisions without real engagement, existing in a state of suspended animation as he waited for some sign from Jiwoo that she was ready to talk. The staff at the mansion whispered about her sudden disappearance, speculating about whether she had been fired after all, or had left voluntarily, or had been installed in some apartment somewhere as Minho's mistress. Mrs. Park maintained a pointed silence on the subject, though her disapproval was evident in her every interaction with him. 3 weeks passed with no communication. Minho resisted the urge to try to find her, to use his resources to locate where she was staying, to force contact when she had asked for space. But the restraint required to honor her request felt like it was slowly destroying him from the inside. It was late one evening, as winter finally began its slow transition toward spring, when she finally appeared at the mansion's main entrance. The night staff called Minho immediately, and he came downstairs to find her standing in the grand foyer, looking thinner and more exhausted than when she had left, but somehow more settled, as if she had reached some internal resolution during her absence. He dismissed the staff and led her to his private sitting room, neither of them speaking until the door was closed behind them. I've been staying with a friend from my village who moved to Seoul, she said without preamble, working at a cafe during the days, trying to figure out what I want. And I think I finally know. Tell me, he said quietly. I can't work here anymore, she said. I can't exist in your world as a subordinate. It puts too much strain on both of us and creates too many complications. But I also can't just walk away from you and pretend I don't feel what I feel. So I need to build my own life first, find my own job, my own place to live, my own sense of purpose that isn't tied to your mansion or your money or your influence. I need to know that I can stand on my own before I can even consider whether there's any possibility for us. I understand, he said, though it hurt to acknowledge that she was right. I'm going to stay in Seoul, she continued. I found a position at a community center in one of the neighborhoods near where I was staying. It doesn't pay much, but it's enough to cover a small apartment and basic expenses. I'll be working with children from low-income families, helping with after-school programs and educational support. It feels meaningful in a way that domestic work never really did. That sounds perfect for you, he said sincerely. I wanted you to know where I'll be and what I'll be doing, she said. Not because I'm asking for anything, but because I didn't want you to worry, and because... She hesitated, then continued more quietly. Because I wanted to leave the door open. Not for now. Maybe not for a long time. But someday, if I manage to build something for myself that feels solid and real, if I can look at you without feeling like I'm drowning in the inequality between us, maybe then we could try again. On more equal ground. I'll wait, he said immediately. Don't, she said firmly. Don't put your life on hold for a maybe. Live your life. If our paths are meant to cross again in a meaningful way, they will. But you can't just freeze in place waiting for me to feel ready. That's not fair to either of us. But you're leaving the door open? He asked, needing to hear it again. I'm leaving the door open, she confirmed. Just not walking through it right now. She stepped forward and hugged him briefly, a gesture of affection and farewell that contained all the complicated emotions they both felt. Then she pulled back, gave him one last long look, and walked out of the room. Minho stood there for a long time after she left, feeling simultaneously heartbroken and hopeful. Devastated by her departure, but grateful that she hadn't closed off all possibility of future reconnection. The months that followed were a strange period of adjustment. Minho threw himself into work with renewed focus, using the challenges of business to distract himself from the personal disappointment he felt. But he also began to make changes in his life, small at first, but gradually more significant. He started volunteering at charitable organizations, finding a way to connect with people and causes that existed outside the insular world of corporate power. He reconnected with old friends he had neglected, rebuilding relationships that had atrophied under the weight of his responsibilities. He even began attending a weekly book club at a local library, finding unexpected pleasure in discussing literature with strangers who had no idea who he was or what he represented in the business world. He thought of Jiwoo often. Too often, probably. But he tried to respect her request that he not simply wait in suspended animation for her return. He dated occasionally, though none of the relationships progressed beyond a few dinners, as he found himself comparing every woman to someone who existed in a category entirely her own in his mind. Through discreet inquiries, he learned that she was doing well at the community center, that she had earned a reputation as a patient and dedicated worker, that the children in her programs adored her. He was glad for her success, even as he missed her presence in his life with an ache that never fully subsided. It was nearly a year later, just as winter was beginning to settle over the city again, that Minho encountered her unexpectedly at a charity gala he was attending. The event benefited educational programs for underprivileged youth, and Jiwoo was there representing the community center where she worked, soliciting donations and speaking about the impact of their programs. He saw her across the room and felt his heart clench with familiar longing. She looked different, more confident, more comfortable in her own skin, wearing a simple but elegant dress that she had clearly chosen herself, rather than accepting cast-offs or borrowing from others. She was speaking with a group of potential donors, articulating her points with passionate clarity, and he felt a surge of pride watching her command their attention. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and he saw surprise and pleasure flash across her face. She excused herself from the conversation she was having and made her way toward him. "Hello," she said, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Hello," he replied. "You look well?" "So do you," she said, and there was warmth in her voice that hadn't been there during their last conversation. "I heard you've been doing some charity work yourself. Several of the organizations I work with have mentioned your contributions." "I had a good teacher," he said quietly, meaning her. The way she had shown him that genuine connection and meaningful work existed outside the corporate structures that had defined his life. They talked for nearly an hour, catching up on the year that had passed, sharing stories about their respective work and lives. The conversation felt easier than their previous interactions, less weighted with impossible expectations and unresolved tension. They had both grown, he realized. Both had found ways to exist more fully as themselves, rather than as roles defined by circumstance. As the evening drew to a close, Jiwoo touched his arm lightly. Would you want to have coffee sometime, just to talk? As friends, or whatever we are to each other now? I'd like that very much, he said. They met for coffee the following week at a small cafe in her neighborhood, far from the venues where Minho's usual social circle gathered. They talked about books they had read, changes in the city, small observations about life that felt meaningful precisely because they were shared. The meetings became regular, then frequent. They remained careful, neither pushing for more than the other seemed ready to give, but gradually allowing the connection between them to deepen in healthier ways than it had before. She told him about her work at the community center, the challenges and rewards of helping children navigate difficult circumstances. He shared his frustrations with corporate politics, and his growing conviction that success measured purely in profit margins felt increasingly hollow. It was during one of these conversations, several months into their renewed friendship, that she looked at him with an expression that was both vulnerable and determined. "I think I'm ready," she said quietly. He didn't need to ask what she meant. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I don't think I'll ever be completely sure. There will always be complications. The power difference between us still exists, even if it's less extreme than when I worked for you. People will still judge and speculate. It will never be simple or easy. But," he prompted gently, "but I've spent the past year and a half learning to build a life I'm proud of, independent of you. I know I can stand on my own now, and knowing that makes me less afraid of what might happen if I let you in. I don't need you to save me or support me or fix my problems, but I want you in my life anyway. As a partner, not a benefactor." "I want that too," he said. "More than I can express." "Then let's try," she said, carefully, slowly, with our eyes open to the complications, but let's try. They began dating openly, and it felt like coming home after a long journey through difficult terrain. There were challenges, certainly. His family disapproved of his choice to be with someone from such a different background. Some of his business associates made tasteless jokes about the former housekeeper who had captured his attention. The social circles he moved in were not always welcoming to her, and she faced subtle and not so subtle forms of judgment from people who viewed her as an outsider or an opportunist. But she faced these challenges with quiet dignity, never apologizing for who she was or where she came from, never seeking to change herself to fit into a world that hadn't been designed with her in mind. And gradually, most people either accepted the relationship or learned to keep their disapproval to themselves. Minho found himself happier than he had ever been, grounded in a relationship that felt genuine and reciprocal in ways he had never experienced before. Jiwoo challenged him, called him out when his privilege blinded him to important realities, pushed him to think more deeply about his responsibilities and the impact of his choices. But she also supported him, celebrated his successes, provided comfort during failures, and loved him in a way that felt both generous and demanding. They were sitting together in his apartment one evening, nearly 2 years after they had first met, preparing dinner together in the kind of comfortable silence that came from deep familiarity, when she turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about the future, about what we want our life together to look like." "And?" he asked, giving her his full attention. "I don't want to be the woman who married rich and left her own work behind," she said firmly. "The community center matters to me. The work I do there feels important. I need you to understand that whatever happens between us, I'm not giving that up." "I would never ask you to," he said. "I know you wouldn't ask," she said. "But there will be pressures and expectations, especially if we get more serious about this relationship. Your world has certain ideas about what the partner of a CEO should be and do. I need to know that you're prepared to defend my choices, even when they're unconventional or inconvenient." "I will," he promised. "I've learned something from you over these years, that status and power mean nothing if they're not used in service of something meaningful, that the most valuable things in life are often the ones that can't be bought or controlled, that real love means supporting someone's growth, even when it complicates your own life." She smiled, and he saw some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Good. Because I love you, and I want to build a life with you. But it has to be a life where we're both fully ourselves, where neither of us is diminished or constrained by the other's expectations." "That's exactly what I want too," he said. They continued cooking together, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, But something had settled between them in that exchange, a mutual understanding about the terms of their relationship going forward, a recognition that their love was strong enough to withstand the challenges they would inevitably face. They married the following spring in a ceremony that reflected both of their values, small and intimate, held not in a grand hotel ballroom but in the community center where Ji-woo worked, attended by a mixture of her colleagues, the children from her programs, and a carefully selected group of Minho's friends and family members who had shown genuine warmth toward her. It wasn't the fairy tale ending that romantic comedies promised, where all problems dissolved in the face of love and everything became effortless and perfect. They still faced skepticism from some quarters, still navigated the complexities of their different backgrounds, still argued occasionally about where to spend holidays or how to handle certain social obligations. But they built something real together. A partnership based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the hard-won understanding that love required more than just feeling. It required choice, commitment, and the willingness to keep choosing each other even when circumstances made it difficult. Minho continued running his company, but he began to shift its focus toward more sustainable and socially responsible practices, using his position to create opportunities for people from backgrounds similar to Ji-woo's, working to break down some of the barriers that had made their own relationship so complicated. Ji-woo expanded her work at the community center, eventually directing a program that provided educational support and mentorship to young people from low-income families, giving them pathways to opportunities they might never have discovered otherwise. They lived their lives not in separation from the world, but deeply engaged with it, using their combined resources and privileges to create change while never forgetting the lessons that had brought them together. That authentic connection transcended social boundaries, that genuine love required vulnerability and courage, that the most meaningful lives were built not on avoiding difficulty, but on facing it with integrity and compassion. Years later, when asked about their relationship, Minho would sometimes reflect on that first dinner, the moment when he had crossed a line he knew he shouldn't, and invited a housekeeper to join him for an evening away from the mansion. He would think about all the complications that had followed, the pain and struggle and near loss of something precious before it had barely begun. And he would say, with absolute certainty, that it had been worth it. Every difficult moment, every challenge, every instance of having to defend their choices against a world that wanted them to conform to easier, more conventional paths. Because in Ji-woo, he had found not just a partner, but a mirror that reflected back to him the person he wanted to become. Someone capable of genuine connection, someone who valued people over status, someone who understood that the greatest privilege was the freedom to choose love over convenience, meaning over ease, authentic relationship over safe distance. They hadn't escaped the complexities of their different backgrounds. They had learned to navigate them together, building a life that honored both their histories while creating something new and uniquely their own. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.